All right, hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Justin Prince. I'm going to be your instructor this semester for History 4563, the Cold War. And in this class, what we're going to do, we're going to look at the origins of the Cold War. We're going to look at, what exactly it was, how it was fought, the impact on society, and we're going to do so from a global perspective. So this is not going to be limited to just the United States, despite, a little bit of humor here, Cold War reenactors. But instead, we're going to look at the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, France, Germany, East and West Germany. We're going to look at Asia. We're going to look at South America and Africa. And I'm going to try, although we're going to focus a lot on the major participants. So yes, Britain, the United States, Soviet Union, they're going to get them, they're going to be probably the main focus of the course. Try to give you an idea of everything. So there's going to be a lot of work to do. I posted the syllabus, but just to go over it in brief, what I'll be doing is 3 times a week I'll be posting lectures like this, video lectures. I'll have the PowerPoint slides posted where, you can just download them and look at them, but I will also be doing these video lectures where I'm, just going to talk about the material, I'm going to lecture. I try to teach this class in a very standard format. I try to make it as much like a traditional class as possible. I'm also going to be uploading videos, things like that, because the Cold War takes place, from it's 1945 to about Christmas Day 1991. And that's the height of the information age, when you have all sorts of television reports, news broadcasts, newsreels, movies, film, all this sort of stuff. And we can use that, and especially in an online setting. A lot of this, thankfully, has been uploaded to YouTube. It's in the public domain. So we're going to take advantage of that. So in many times what you might find is I might just do 2 lectures and say, hey, watch this documentary. Or I might post a lecture, and the lecture might only be like 35, 40 minutes long, and I'll say, hey, here's about 15 minutes of video clips I want you to watch. When I teach this class in person, I usually intersperse the lecture with a lot of videos. I'm not going to do that with this one video just to make it so it's not too big. So instead, I'll reference clips and say, hey, I think you should go watch this type of stuff on your own. And I'll post links and all that. And what I'll do is every time I upload a video, I'll post an announcement to the course webpage. So ideally, you should be checking it 3-4 times a week, though generally I will upload stuff on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. I've just found that that's typically the most convenient time for me. My office is 163 South Murray Hall. I'll be in there Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays from 12:30 to 1:30. So if there's anything I can do to help you with, if you're on the Stillwater campus, you can come see me. If you're not, we can work out like Skype chats if you need to talk to me. I can give you my home phone number. It's a cell phone because nobody has landlines anymore. Whatever. If you need to contact me, email me, that's fine. Come to my office, that's fine. Call me, whatever. However you need to get a hold of me, if you do, please, I beg of you, I'm here to help. So, a lot of you have taken my class before, so you know how this works. But for those of you new, if there's anything I can possibly do to help, whether from, problem with the class, problem with the lecture style, to you're just not understanding the material, to even life crisis and you just need somebody to talk to, I am here for you. I will apologize in advance. I love this class. For those of you who take me before, I love to make jokes. I do use a lot of humor, and the Cold War is replete with it. Because when you have a situation where you realize that both sides are gearing towards total nuclear annihilation, especially us now removed from that, okay, it seems almost stupid. It's almost farcical. I can remember as a child of the Cold War when, I'm from Skytook, Oklahoma, which, if you know where that is, I'm sorry. But I remember as a child, my dad, explaining to me what a nuclear bomb was, explaining to me, who the Soviets were, the quintessential bad guys, and that Skytook being, is just north of Tulsa, and that Tulsa was a nuclear target thanks to the Boeing plant. And so if Tulsa were to ever be hit, by that time would have been a hydrogen bomb, probably from a Soviet intercontinental or submarine-launched ballistic missile, that after I saw the flash within a few minutes, I would probably either be dead from the explosion or die later from the radiation. And I remember being a 5-year-old child and going, what? Just not comprehending. Who are these people? Why do they want to kill me? What is a war? What is a mushroom cloud? These questions. And so today, for those of you who did not live through that, it looks pretty stupid. It looks like, why would people do that? But the fact is, for 45 years, 46 years, that's exactly what happened. And so we're going to kind of get into that, why it happened, how it happened, what were the origins, why did it continue, and then we're going to talk about several times when things literally almost went to hell in a handbasket. So now just some procedural things. The way exams are going to work for this course is what I'm going to do is how this course will work is, again, I try to make it as traditional as possible. I don't like multiple choice. I tried a quiz with my History of the Second World War online class. Half the class bombed it, so I did extra credit. So instead, what we're going to do is we've got some other assignments instead of that for those of you that took that. For the exam, what you'll do is I try to replicate as close as possible the ID and essay exams you would typically take in an in-person 1103 or in-person history class. So half of it will be an ID exam, where your ID lists, I'll give those out, you have about 25 terms. I'm going to put about 10 of them on the exam, you define 5 of them. And what you'll do is you'll need to download, it's called Respondus Lockdown Browser. And actually, I put a link to that in the syllabus, but you might not even need that because I think the new Banner D2L has that already integrated. I'm not sure, but I'll double check. But this is the first online class I've taught since we've upgraded, so we'll see how that goes. If not, we'll blame the Russians hacking. That's actually appropriate for this course. So those damn commies. And I apologize if I offend anybody with my jokes. It will probably happen. But, I love, the Cold War is one of the things you can joke about because some of it's just so stupid. But what I'll do is I'll put 10 of the terms on there randomly. And then what you'll do is through D2L, okay, it'll be timed about 20, 25 minutes, and then you'll just have to answer, define them. So it could be things, what's Sputnik? Define the Korean conflict. What is mutually assured destruction? What, is the long telegram? Stuff like that. And, in these ID terms, again, you want paragraph. I need to know the dates. I need to know who was involved, what it is, why it's important. Give me details. This is a 4,000 level class. So while I consider myself an easy grader, okay, I will expect you to put the effort in, okay? Also understand, these ID lists are also the study guide for your essays because, I'm only going to put about a third or so for the essays, but it's still imperative that you know everything. Don't take this class. Don't treat it as a blow-off class. Now for the essays, what I'm going to do is instead of your standard, answer, here's 2 essays, answer 1. What I will do is the week we have the exam, I probably, if I post a lecture, will only be 1, and I'll make a special case and put it on Monday. But you'll have from Tuesday through Friday to midnight. And what I'll do is I'll give you 4 essay prompts. And you're going to write about 2 of them. And what you're going to do, you're going to basically write a 2 to 3 page response to each prompt. And what you're going to do, and we'll work through this as we go, but you're going to need to cite from the lecture. You're going to need to cite from your 4 textbooks, which you do have to buy and which you will need. You're going to be doing book reviews, so you've got to have those books. And I recommend, you can read them in whatever order you want, though obviously some, Gaddis I would read first. He's just kind of a good primer for the Cold War. You're not really going to need 6 Days of War till we talk about the Middle East. You're not really going to need Global Cold War until we get more towards the 1970s, 1980s. and, Dead Hand again to the 80s. So, I mean, you can kind of stagger it however you want. But what you'll need to do is, I do expect that you cite from those books. Now, you don't need to cite from all of them, though, I mean, you can, index and do it that way. But I expect that as you go through and you've read this stuff, that you'll remember it and then you can incorporate it on your exams. So you're going to be tested as far as the essays, not so much on what you remember, but rather, can you assimilate all this stuff like the Borg? Can you put it in its proper historical context? Can you explain what's important, show that you can make those connections with other events, things like that. It might sound complicated, but I've actually had really good results with it in the online classes I've taught, so it should not present a problem. Dates and story, this is kind of my standard for history classes. I feel dates are important. You will be graded for dates, but they're not as important as the story. So, as always, if you can get stuff into the decade, you'll get partial credit. And if you can link it with an event, so if you can say, well, the Cuban Missile Crisis happens because of the development of ballistic missile stuff and is spawned by, what's going on in Germany and the creation of the Berlin Wall in the year before the crisis, okay, you'll get more points than if you just simply say, well, Cuban Missile Crisis 1960s. Link it with what happened in the past. Tell me, link it with what's going on. Show me that in the chronology of events that you know where it fits. If you can do that, you will do great in this course, I promise you. Now, what I will say is I'm not a tough grader. I'm really not. If you try, I will meet you halfway. But my whole thing about grading, stuff like that, kind of goes in with my just tips with college classes. I know this is an online class. I know I'm not there to kind of scold you if you're on your phone or texting or, playing whatever while you're listening to this. And, if that's what works for you, great. But ideally, as you're listening to this, you should still be jotting down notes. I mean, I'm going to treat this as a 50-minute class period. You need to answer your exam stuff fully. Okay, with your book reviews, with your essay parts, with the IDs, with the movie analysis, which we'll talk about later. You need to give as much detail as possible. Okay? Don't just, the conflict in Korea was a conflict that occurred in Korea. And believe me, I've gotten that from an 1103, so, don't know. Be as detailed as possible. The best advice I ever got, and this was from my history undergraduate advisor, was the best way to pass a college class was not to study the material, but to learn it. And it sounds like kind of a stupid differentiation, but if you study, it's just rote memorization. It's blah, 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 blah. But if you learn it, if you can ask questions, if you can say, why did they do that? Why was this so important? What could that have led to? Why did they not see that coming? Why did people think this was a good idea? That's my favorite for this class. Then you're more likely to remember it. Keep up with the readings. You have 4 books to read. And I'll tell you this. Right now, before you freak out, part of the reason I have such a heavy reading load is as a 4,000 level class, I assume many of you are going to be graduating soon and going to grad school, hopefully, in history, so you can join me in my vow of poverty. Book reviews are going to be a staple. And when I was an undergraduate, pardon me, I've got a little bit of a cold, When I was an undergraduate, the most book reviews I ever had in a course was 2. So I'm like, okay, this isn't that bad. You've got 8 weeks to read a book. When you're in graduate school, it is not uncommon for you to be reading one 300-page book per week per class. Okay, there were literally times in graduate school I was reading 2 300-page books per week. Okay, that is a hell of a lot if you're not prepared. So what I like to do is I like to give you an increased reading load just so you can kind of work into that. But now here, I'm going to let you in on a little trade secret. Do not read cover to cover. That's pointless and stupid and a waste of your time. If you want to, great. If you can, great. But for many of you, I know we've got some non-trad students. I know we've got some, working adults. I know we've got people doing all the extracurricular activities, people who are like, I'm going to take 21 hours of classes because I hate my life. You just don't have time for that. Skim. If bare minimum, if you have to, first and last sentence of every paragraph, and read, 3/4 of the book at most. Okay, read enough so you can get a sense of what they're talking about, so you can see what the important ideas are, so you can determine if the author's biased or not, what his main points are, stuff like that. But you do not have to read every word. This should not. I give you 4 weeks per book, but skimming, you should be able to have each one skimmed in about a week and a half. So my advice to you is, and I hate being cliche, let's go full on Dilbert pointy-haired boss, work smarter, not harder. This should not be so much work you get swamped. That is not my goal. My goal is to help ease you into graduate school, to give you, some tips of the trade, and to make it so when you do go get those advanced degrees, it's not quite the shock it was for me. So keep up with the readings, be aware of the readings, do your best. If you get into a bind, if it comes exam time, you don't have time to do the exam, stuff happens. If you get behind on homework or something, whatever, if life happens, tell me. I am here to help you. I will work with you. It is my hope that every one of you passes with an A. That's good for you. You get your A's. That's good for me. I get good reviews. Everybody wins. I want to help you. So whatever I can do, please let me know. Now with that, let's go ahead and move on to what's going to be our first lecture, which is the origins of the Cold War. And I know this is going to sound funny, but we're not actually going to get to the Cold War until probably next week. Because you've got to ask yourself, in light of 2 world wars, in light of the United States bankrolling the Soviet Union, giving them planes, tanks, spam, and I kid you not, Nikita Khrushchev, later premier of the Soviet Union, who was a local defense commander at Stalingrad, said, if not for spam, the Soviets would have lost World War II. And how the hell bad do you have to do if spam is a good thing? How do we go from that to, we've got our nukes pointed at them, they've got their nukes pointed at us, and if somebody breathes wrong, the world bathes in nuclear fire. The fact is, the fear of communism, the fear of socialism, begins many, 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 many years before 1945. Sorry, I know this is frustrating, but it begins years before 1945. The fact is, part of the issue for the Cold War is the fundamentally basic question. Can capitalism and communism coexist? Can the two exist in the same world? And it sounds stupid until you realize that by 1945, the world is imperceptibly small now. The world of 1945 differs from any other year before it based on just sheer rate of technological advances. We have in 1939, people are flying biplanes. Now we have jets. In 1939, a rocket was, just this little flimsy military weapon of limited value. And on July 20, 1944, the day of the von Stauffenberg plot, the Germans under Wernher von Braun take a V-2 rocket, set it to go straight up, and it achieves an altitude of something like 150 kilometers, which according to the United Nations is technically space. It doesn't orbit the Earth, it just comes back down. But in World War II, human beings for the first time send something to space. You now have radar. You now have microwave radiation. You now have the nuclear bomb. All of this stuff, Not to mention you now have aircraft. Again, there's a thing from the History Channel I love to steal from my classes. What was their old series? Man, Moment, Machine. The idea that if you have the right guy in the right moment of history with the right technology, it can change the world. So let's PCify it. Let's call it person-time technology. Well, that's what 1945 is. You have now these technologies. You have the moment in time where now you have a huge Russian army right next to a huge American army, atomic weapons, planes that can fly thousands of miles. Okay, now for the first time, we have to deal with the fact that capitalism and communism will be constantly intermingling. When the Soviet Union is born in the 1920s, nobody really has to have dealings with it. It doesn't matter. But the world of 1945, 1946 is so much different. And people look back to, well, what had been the interactions before? And the interactions were not good. In the United States, we've always had a fear of socialism, anarchy, and communism, which many like to wrap up into this one, just amorphous blob of bad stuff. Let's look 1886, the Haymarket riot in Chicago. When cops could shoot anarchists, that's fine. But when anarchists then threw a bomb into a bunch of cops, then suddenly, oh, no. This will not stand. You can't do that. You have crossed a moral line. Okay? There's always been a fear of Marxists ever since, Karl Marx began publishing his works. There's a fear of the lower classes. Think of the new immigration in the 1890s. When, people were coming over from Eastern Europe that were Catholic, uneducated, couldn't speak the language. Remember, by 1900, 4/5 of Chicago is foreign-born, and people distrust immigrants. They fear that, the diluting of the races. I mean, there's a racial element there. Again, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, the stereotypical what Americans are supposed to be. Never mind African Americans, Native Americans, Irish who are not considered white, all of this stuff. Okay. There's always fear of social revolution. Okay, this is the same era as the Gilded Age, when guys like John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, Cornelius Vanderbilt are making money hand over fist, but they're doing it on the backs of the people. So you understand, socialism, communism has always been a bottom-up centered type of thing. Okay, but the American view in the 19th century had always been top-down. I like the idea, well, I don't like, but it fits, the idea of how American train cars used to be coupled. Using the link and pin system, you'd have a little box on one end of the car, and you'd have, this big chain on another. And what a guy would be paid to do is, as the train cars are backing in together, he'd be standing between them, guide the chain into the box, drop a pin, and jump back out. And it was set on a railroad. If you had all 5 fingers, you didn't know what you were doing. If you had 4, you got some experience. You got 3, oh, you really know what you're doing. You got 2, oh man, you're really good. You got 1, sucks to be you. It's time to find another job. There's no health care. There's no safety net. Okay, literally, it is cheaper to fire a worker than to upgrade safety conditions. This is the theory of social Darwinism, which justifies capitalism by saying that if you are making it, it is because you are smarter and better than everyone else and you deserve it. Okay? So what we see in the 19th century is that's all great and well if you're in that top 1%, if you're a Bernie Sanders fan. Or rather, not a Bernie Sanders fan. But if you are, the people at the bottom, the breaker boys in the coal mines, the brakemen with the one finger now, the guys like the protagonist of Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, okay, where, his expose that fails, unfortunately, but on the living conditions of immigrants, where, you can be sold bad houses, where employers, can force themselves on your wife and you can't do anything, where the legal system is stacked against you. That breeds social upheaval. Which is why you see strikes, social movements like the International Workers of the World, things like the Haymarket Square riot. And this concerns people. This makes people distrustful in the United States. But the fact is, this situation is going on all over the world. But in the American sphere, when the military is called in, such as in the Pullman strike of the 1890s, or when Andrew Carnegie and his assistant foreman use Pinkerton security guys to bust the Homestead strikers. There's public outcry. Because in the United States, people are like, no, you can't do this. No. But what happens in an authoritarian system? What happens in a place where you can? Enter the 1905 revolution in Russia. Specifically, Bloody Sunday, January 22nd, 1905, when large groups of Russian peasants in Petersburg wanted to try to get an audience with the Tsar. In the Russian system, the Tsar is autocratic. Okay, now what that means, it's he and his family rule this. There's limited freedoms. There's repression. You do not have basic rights. You can't say, well, I think the Tsar is full of crap. Well, you'll be taken out back and shot. Or you'll end up in prison. Okay. Well, what we're going to see, though, is contrast that with the hyper-religiousness of Russia. They're a very orthodox country. The Tsar is treated like a father, anointed by God, and the people of Russia are his children, as well as his property. So from the Russian peasant perspective, okay, well, we have complaints, we have problems, we're starving, we want to go talk to Dad. That is the thought. And Tsar Nicholas's guard cuts them down. Now, what this does is this shows us how politically fragile Russia is. And that's something that we often overlook with the Cold War, is that fragility carries over to the Soviet Union. This is not going to be a class of where I say that America's great, America, it's all the commies' fault. No. The fact is we have an equal share to blame for the Cold War. But one of the things with the Soviet Union, why they act the way they do, is they are a politically weak and fragile nation, prone to overreacting. That is a legacy inherited from Tsarist Russia. Tsarist Russia in 1905 is literally, this is a place that is falling apart. On February 8th, 1904, the Japanese launch a surprise attack at Port Arthur, which triggers the Russo-Japanese War. By 1905, the Russian Pacific Fleet is sunk at the bottom of Port Arthur. They've sent the majority of what remains of their navy, the Baltic and the Black Seas fleet, on around the world cruise to then hopefully go retake Port Arthur, which is in Korea, and, secure Manchuria. Manchuria, which had been under the occupation of Russia. But by 1905, they're losing. Then you get these attack on the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg. Then June 14, the battleship Potemkin mutinies. Because literally, okay, they're supposed to sail out, and the crew of the Potemkin, okay, the thought is that it spurs because they were being fed, the officers were abusive, the food they were being fed was substandard. The crew said, no, we've had enough, we're done. We're literally revolting. And they take over the battleship and kill most of the officers. And we see that by October, okay, as Russia has now lost the war, Russia's navy, most of it, the Baltic and the Black Sea fleets, have been destroyed at the Battle of Tsushima. Russia has literally overnight lost its world power status. Manchuria and Korea are now in the hands of the Japanese. And the Japanese overnight become a world power. By October, there are strikes all over the country. And the death toll is rising. So Nicholas II, who believed he didn't have to answer the peasants, responds with what he calls the October Manifesto. He promises, I will be a reformer. I promise we're going to do things to fix this. I will create a Duma. We will create a representative body where the elites, not you, but the elites can voice their grievances and maybe we can deal with that. It's almost like trickle-down economics. The thought being that, the peasants, we don't want to give them a voice, but maybe the bourgeois will have some of the same concerns. Now, this seems like if we were to just stop right here, well, over and done, period, full stop. The revolution's over. But the fact is, this is simply a taste to come. This shows a revolution can be done. It shows that all of Russia is really ticked off with the way the Tsar is running the country. And so this is literally a primer for the 1917 revolution that will bring everything to a screeching halt. If you look at the Russian state, okay, there is massive unemployment. There's simply not enough jobs to go around. The problem with autocracy is there's no room for innovation. You don't have to compete. You don't have to say, well, hey, if I'm going to get voted out. So, there's no reason to innovate. At the same time, this isn't like a constitutional monarchy like Great Britain, where, okay, you might have the figurehead, but you actually have a parliament running the show with a vested interest, and again, where they can be voted out. Instead, it's Nicholas and the Romanov dynasty running the country as they see fit, as their own personal property. So there's no reason to innovate, there's no reason for technological advancement, and you can live in a happy little bubble believing everything is fine when it's crumbling around you. We're also going to see that, okay, massive unemployment. Who's that going to affect? That's affecting the peasants. But Nicholas distrusts the peasants. Why? He looks at the death of Alexander II, his grandfather. His grandfather, in 1861, had emancipated the serfs. He was called Alexander the Liberator, and for his trouble, somebody threw a bomb into his carriage in 1881 and killed him. 1883. And so what that does to Nicholas is makes it think, okay, well, I helped you, and this is what you did, so why am I going to help you? So because he's religious, because he views he owns the country, because of his distrust, he maintains a secret police force. There is no dissent tolerated in Russia. The biggest employer is going to be the Russian army, which World War I, everybody incorrectly assumed was going to be the Russian steamroller, that this is what was going to win World War I. But the problem is there's no innovation since the Russo-Japanese War. It's a large army, but who are the officers? They're cronies, they're people appointed based on who they know, and the senior top-level guys are Romanovs. After all, they own it, they own the toy, they get to play with it. The country is not industrialized. Russia wanted to see itself as separate and distinct from its Western competitors. They did not want to go the way of the rest of Europe. So it's still a largely backwards agricultural nation, a peasant-centered nation, where there's not necessarily a Russian nation that everybody's a part, but rather a Russian state under the control of the Romanovs. The Dumas are ineffective. Why? Because the only 4 are called, and in many cases Nicholas simply dissolves them. This is not like a House of Representatives, even if that's what it was supposed to be. And so these reforms never happen. 1905 shows that things are broken, and it just simmers and simmers and simmers. Take that. Take the fact this is very much a 1700s power. Okay, although the technology is a little different, Russia in many ways looks like that of Alexander I, who had fought Napoleon. Take that. Have a cataclysm such as World War I, and the whole system is going to blow apart. And it's out of here we're going to see that initial oomph. Can capitalism and communism coexist? The United States doesn't like communism. Britain doesn't like communism. How does communism come to be? Well, for World War I, remember, we're jumping ahead of the story, but the communists, the Bolsheviks, are going to murder Tsar Nicholas and his family. Well, let's look at Europe. Okay? King George V, Kaiser Wilhelm II. They are cousins of Nicholas because their grandmother is Queen Victoria. Capitalism establishes a state by pissing off all of the monarchies. That instantly makes them anti-communist. And they see this as a disease that cannot be allowed to spread. And how does that disease take hold? Simple. World War I is a complete disaster. Russia is not prepared for a modern war. This is not like the days of Napoleon. Okay. They thought, okay, well, we'll just mobilize the army, we'll go beat Germany, yay, problem solved. That doesn't work. Because the Russians are the average peasant, the average conscript is not well trained. Okay, he doesn't have access to many heavy weapons. Okay, the army is not that well equipped with artillery. And in many cases, as at the Battle of Tannenberg, Russian commanders feud with each other. And literally, entire armies won't go support other Russian armies because the commanders are, literally pissed off at each other. So what this means, from the very outset, from 1914, they do badly. By 1915, Nicholas II takes direct control of the army. He has no military experience leading field armies. So now you have an inept commander leading all of these troops. You've now removed the ability of the Tsar to govern. And you say at the same time, you've got guys like Rasputin, who's making inroads with Tsar Nicholas's wife, basically poisoning himself and saying, well, look, I can cure your son's hemophilia. And so the Russian peasantry begins to turn against the Tsar. Especially when you look at this. 1.8 million Russians die in the First World War. 2 million become prisoners of war. Now those numbers are amazingly small once we talk about World War II. But from a 1917 perspective, this stuns the world. This shows just how bad things are, because this is coming only, World War I's only 9 years after Russia lost in the Russo-Japanese War. And so the Russians say, that's it, we have to have a time for change. Because by 1917, things are going to hell in a handbasket. Wages might rise 50%. So if you're making 1 ruble per hour, you're getting now a ruble 50. But prices 100 to 500%. So your 1 ruble worth of goods, okay, you're now making a ruble and a half, now cost 5 rubles. Yay, you don't get to eat. More and more workers are now concentrated in factories as Russia attempts to industrialize. But poor management, no government protections, bad wages. And we see then, once again, 1917, there's rioting in St. Petersburg. And we see then that Nicholas, again, suspends the Duma. Says, okay, guys, you're clearly not handling it. You're giving voice to the peasants. Away with you. And the Duma says no. The Duma says, in fact, we're going to establish a provisional government under Alexander Kerensky. And we're going to politely ask that you abdicate. Army units begin going over to the provisional government side. And Nicholas realizes by March he has no choice. And he secures from Alexander Kerensky, this guy here on the left, a promise that he and his family will not be harmed. And Kerensky says yes. That might have been the end of the story. Kerensky is not a communist. Kerensky is dedicated to freedom, democracy. He wants a democratic republic. He wants to bring Russia into the modern world. He wants to westernize Russia. This might have aborted the whole Cold War thing, except Kerensky made a critical failure that he can almost be forgiven for making. The people wanted out of the war. The fact is, Russia is suffering so bad, the people say, we want peace at any price. Just get us the hell out of the war. But Kerensky says no. And it's not that he's a warmonger, he just makes the point. Russia started World War I as a member of the Triple Entente. Okay? They were allied with France. Britain is allied with France, so now they're a pseudo-ally of Russia. If Russia drops out of the war, if Russia breaks that promise, then post-war, if the Allies win, which by 1917, it's kind of obvious they're going to, especially in April with the entrance of the United States, who will trade with Russia? Who will tell Russia, you will honor your word. We understand that you will honor your word, so we accept this trade deal. Who is going to tell Russia that? So he says, for Russian integrity, for Russia to make business deals. Russia has to stay in the war. The people don't like that. The Germans don't like that. The Germans realize we need more troops on the Western Front. So the Germans turn to somebody that's been living in exile. And they say, what if we give you special rail transportation to go and pull Russia out of the war? Enter Vladimir Lenin, the student of Marx. The student who says, I believe in a communist Russia. By November 1917, Russia is again collapsing. Because militarily, the Russians just can't do it. They cannot keep pace with the Germans, who themselves can't keep pace with the West. We see then we begin a power struggle. The Mensheviks, the centrists, the guys like Kerensky, and the Bolsheviks, the communists, those who want a Marxist state. Then enter Vladimir Lenin, who in November or October in the old calendar then in use by Russia, launches Red October, the Russian Revolution. This is the Russian Revolution we typically think of. They seize power. Kerensky, there's nothing he can do. He tried, he failed as a leader. People go over to the Bolsheviks, and Russia is about to enter into civil war. The main ruling group now are the Bolsheviks. And on March the 3rd, 1918, they signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, where they surrender huge chunks of Russia. Again, peace at any price. Get Russia out of the war. Then in July, they murder the Tsar and his whole family, extinguish the dynasty. That way, in their eyes, there can be no claimants to, they don't have to worry about a resurgent Russian, a resurgent Tsarist, I suddenly went stupid, resurgent Tsarist attempt to regain control. But then, here's what scares the hell out of people. Okay, now what's happened might be bad enough from the eyes of the West, but come on, people are murdered all the time, there's government coups, whatever. But in 1919, they sponsor the Third International of the Comintern, the International Communism, and they declare they want an international Soviet Republic. They say they want everybody to be one big Soviet Republic, and that just will not do. Enter, from the United States perspective, the first Red Scare. Now, admittedly, part of this is because we're uneasy about World War I. It ends with an armistice, November 1918. Nothing is really solved. But now there's the thought, if it could happen in Russia, it can happen here. Look at those labor issues. That's still there. Who rose up in the Bolshevik Revolution? The factory workers who were underpaid, had bad safety conditions. What do we have at every factory in the United States except for the Ford Motor Company? Underpaid workers with bad factory conditions. There's also the fact, there was unemployment in Russia. Well, guess what? The United States, you're not building rifles, helmets, tanks, planes. Mass unemployment. There's the agricultural issue. People had been used to exporting all sorts of food to Europe. You don't need that now. Europe can feed itself now. Mass unemployment. Prices are rising. There's going to be labor strikes all over the United States. And we see then that people go a little crazy. There's going to be witch hunts for communists. I wish I'd had it, but newspaper articles saying, we've arrested, 4,000 people over the weekend. You're going to get posters like this. Well, labor. Well, if they strike and walk out, that's going to lead to disorders and riots. And once they're rioting, that's Bolshevism and murders. And once that happens, that's chaos, then who knows when. Or the melting pot. This idea we bring in immigrants. People began to be distrustful. You can't trust immigrants from Eastern Europe. Don't trust the people coming from Russia. By the way, does this sound a little familiar to what we're seeing with the Syrian refugees? Well, there's ISIS is over there, so don't trust them. That's the same thing here. Basically, people saying that Bolshevik people are going to come in with these immigrants and start triggering a revolution over here. That they're going to destroy the United States because that's what happened in Russia. Which is why we'll get songs by M.L. Jennings and Leo Friedman. We'll never change the blue and white to red. even though there's red on the flag, but whatever. But it's this idea, look, and if you look at it, factories, anarchy. That's the fear. The fear is, because it's Uncle Sam still in his World War I uniform, standing on factories, worried about anarchy. We're worried that it's going to happen here. And the fact there's a Russian civil war going on is not helping anybody at this point. Because now the West is becoming concerned. What if this does spread? We see that the Reds, the communists, begin fighting the Whites under Admiral Kolchak, who the Whites, these are people that had been loyal to the Tsar, that, were not communists or disagreed with the murder of the Tsar, or who disagreed with the fact that although the Tsar had been repressive, the Bolsheviks are promising to be equally, if not more so, repressive. And so we begin this civil war until 1924. The Red Terror, even by 1918, as the Bolsheviks seize power, as they end World War I, the repressive system is already there. Political murder becomes the order of the day. Oh, you disagree with us? Blam! It's literally just, no, the state cannot tolerate dissent. And so we see then that numerous groups, and one of the biggest ones would be Czechs, the Czechoslovakia, which at the time did not exist, rose up and began fighting all over Russia, from the Caucasus all the way to Siberia. And this is a fairly bloody war, about 2.7 million casualties. And as this is going on, the Bolsheviks are fighting a simultaneous war with Poland, because now we're going to create a new Poland, and there's border disputes. This is a bloody civil war. Now again, civil wars are commonplace. That should not lead to a Cold War. That should not lead to this idea, can capitalism and communism coexist? Except remember that the whites, had the backing of the Western powers. Because the British, chief among them, guys like Winston Churchill, did not want to see communism spread. He's an ardent anti-socialist. Remember George V. Nicholas was his cousin. He doesn't want to see it spread. Germany is on the brink of revolution. They don't want to see it spread. France doesn't want to see it spread. And they tempt their newfound ally to help them fight in this civil war. And so American doughboys who might have thought that that's it, they're getting ready to go home, are now fighting with the whites. American troops are going to be sent to Arkhangelsk and Siberia in 1919. And, among, here is American troops with British troops and I would assume, Russian troops, white Russians, this idea, okay, we have to fight to stop communism. So one of the things that I'm going to ask you to do throughout this course is I'm going to ask you to challenge your preconceived notions. Okay, well, again, the Soviets are the bad guys. Why? Because communism sucks. Which you will get no argument from me. Okay, I am a conservative by definition. Okay, I'm not a Trump supporter, but I am a conservative. You'll get no argument from me that communism sucks. But look at it from the Soviet point of view. Just as their nation is being born, here come the Americans, the French, and the British to abort it. That's going to put a hell of an inferiority complex on them from the very beginning that's going to make them distrustful of anything we do. And that's exactly what happens. So if we look then at American involvement in Russia, the fact is it is a complete disaster. The troops don't fight that much. There's some mutinies. The fact is the idea we want to free these white Russians, but it just doesn't work. But this is part of a larger allied effort, fighting all over Russia, trying to stop the Soviets. We're going to send 5,000 to northern Russia, AEF northern Russia. We're going to see another 7,500 to Siberia. And, by 1919 for Arkhangelsk, 1920, the American troops are recalled. So this is just kind of an abortive attempt of, hey, look, we realize now the United States is a world power. And that's the thing to understand. We're just becoming a world power at this point. The Soviets are just being born at this point. But why these events are critical is Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, who, Reagan pushed for disarmament. Reagan, believe it or not, did not like nuclear weapons. And one of the things I'm going to be doing in this course is I'm going to make comparisons with modern politics. Because what we might be seeing today is a Cold War 2.0. Donald Trump, the president-elect of the United States, has called for a new nuclear arms race with Russia. Well, consider this. Many in the Republican Party, venerate Ronald Reagan. Reagan hated nuclear weapons. Reagan advocated for total nuclear disarmament. This is flying in the face of 1980s Reagan policies. And one of the things Reagan did is he did a TV speech. He was really good at that, which is great because that's a lot of stuff that we can use for this class. But he said in a direct message to General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev, why are our two nations fighting each other? Why are we in this cold conflict? The United States and Russia have never fought each other. We have never had, we've never fought against each other. Why is there this distrust? And Gorbachev sent back a personal message, TV, saying, yes, Mr. President, we have fought each other. The American people might not remember, but the Soviet people remember. Again, this is in part of the birth history of the Soviet Union, when American troops came to fight their country. We don't like to remember it because we like to just, hey, end of World War I, yay. But the Soviets remember. And the Soviets very quickly move to, after they win the war, again, the whites don't have the technology, they don't have the backing. Many become émigrés. Helen Mirren, is actually part Russian because her family was an émigré to Britain. Which is why she's, in 2010, the year we make contact, is so easily able to be fluent in Russian. Because she is. The Russians then the Soviets now, become the hardline, repressive, stereotypical communists we all know and love. And around that we can center the rise of Joseph Stalin. Lenin had two main followers, Leon Trotsky and Joseph Stalin. But there had been a power struggle on Lenin's death in 1924. And Stalin immediately became a dictator. And Stalin is not his real name. Stalin means Joe Steele. Well, Joseph Joe Steele. Stalin, Steele. And the thing is, Stalin was very, very paranoid. He always believed everyone was out to get him. Consider this, again, skipping into the story. 1953, when he collapses due to presumably a heart attack, none of his doctors will touch him. Because if they try to help and they fail, there's fear they're going to go to a gulag. So, let him die. That's the kind of fear and paranoia that, Stalin has. That he thinks everyone is out to get him. And so Trotsky had been his friend. Trotsky had helped get the Bolshevik Revolution off the ground. By 1928, Trotsky is exiled. Okay. He then begins 5-year plans to rapidly transform the country. And in doing so, he's fine with disrupting the lives of the ordinary people. He wants collectivist farms. And if you don't want to play ball, then he will literally starve you out. He will create gulags where if you are a roadblock to progress, you can be denounced, thrown in a gulag, you can work there till you die. So on the one hand, he's bringing the nation into the modern world, the 20th century. But he's being particularly bloody about how he does it. And what we're going to see is he will begin a series of purges from 1934 to 1940. And again, these purges, including the Great Purge, anybody that might be a threat is eliminated. Oh, you're leading the army? Well, you're a good army commander? Blam. Oh, you're a general. You might have political designs. Blam. Oh, you're a popular politician. Blam. Again, the Soviets have no problem using lethal force to do this. Stalin is very much the dictator, just like the Tsar he had replaced. He doesn't want anyone to challenge his power. The system becomes very repressive. And so at the same time that they're trying to come into the modern era, it's still fairly backwards because it's Stalin leading everything on his own. But what does this all mean? What this means is now if we flash forward to World War II, okay, the Soviets are in this interesting position of they're building the stuff necessary to become a superpower. But at the same time, okay, they have to, in effect, make a deal with the devil. Okay, we see then, if you look at Versailles back in 1919, they create a League of Nations, and the League of Nations is one of the dumbest things in human history, because the idea is to create an organization where nations can work together to solve their problems. That's perfectly fine. Where if one nation has disagreements with another nation, they can work together. Also perfectly fine. But what we're going to do, we're going to ban Weimar Germany. So the nation we blame for World War I cannot come to us to talk to its problems. And we're going to ban the Soviet Union. So the two nations that most, whether based on potential or past, could threaten the geopolitical balance are not able to be joined and monitored. So the two form an uneasy partnership. The Soviets let German troops in to train. They are then trained by the Germans. The Soviets let the Germans come in and build tanks and planes and flamethrowers and artillery and all the stuff that Versailles said they couldn't have. This is why Germany can rearmor, can engage in rearmament so relatively quickly by World War II, is they've been building this stuff in secret in the Soviet Union. They're swapping food and military technology, and by 1939, okay, despite the fact that Russia has sounded the alarm several times, on this idea of, okay, Nazi Germany is becoming a little resurgent, they're like, okay, hey, we'll work with you. It's not because they wanted it, it was more because they realized, and Stalin especially realized, that there's no way that the Soviets could counter Germany effectively. So better play for time, hope for the best, maybe they could do something in the future. So what we see then is the Soviets and the Germans begin working together. And this is, the Soviets do not trust Britain and France. Germany, well, is going to violate that trust. And what all of this leads to is by the end of World War II, Russia doesn't trust anybody, and rightly so. Now, while that's going on in the interwar period, we are running a little pressed for time. I like to keep these around 60 minutes, so I'm not going to spend that much. But just to kind of, again, show that fear of communism, we can look at the bonus army in the 1930s. Okay, you've got the Great Depression. America suffering in the Great Depression. 1932, World War I, U.S. Army veterans march on Washington, D.C. And Douglas MacArthur will, he's ordered by President Hoover, get them out. He does so with tear gas and tanks. Why? Because they're afraid of communism. They're looking to the Bolshevik Revolution. Hey, the last time a big group of people marched on the Capitol building, this is what happened. We overreact because we're afraid of communism. We're afraid, what if that happens here? We can see, similarly, the Spanish Civil War, where this is going to be, a proxy war of World War II, where the Soviets back the Republicans, the Nazis, the Italian fascists back the nationalists. They're both going to send, tanks, planes, troops, fight it out in a proxy war. This is basically a Cold War proxy war before the Cold War. Okay? We can see that American response in the form of the Abraham Lincoln Battalion. These were American troops who willingly volunteered to go to fight the fascists. They joined up with the Republicans. Some are communists, some aren't, but because they fought in the Republican Army, they are organized as a communist army, complete with commissars and everything. Now, after the war, okay, and by the way, if you can tell by this, they had no problem with desegregation, okay? They had no, because again, they see it as, hey, communists, we're all equal, or the is, hey, we're all anti-fascist. After the war, 1939, they come back home. And when in World War II, okay, they were banned from the draft, and then initially banned from recruitment. They went and said, hey, we fought the fascists. This is what we want to do. Let us in. But the fact is they were seen as subversive. They were seen as, well, you might want to indoctrinate the army with communism. We can't do that. We can't have communism coming in to the United States or to the army. Eventually, in the 1950s, during the height of the Second Red Scare, the term that emerged to describe them, and I'm not even making this up, was premature anti-fascist. Well, what you did was good, but you just did it too soon. If you just waited 4 years, this wouldn't have been a problem. How dare you want to fight Nazis before the rest of us? It sounds ridiculous. But what we see going into World War II, and I think this is critical because World War II, again, we're helping the Soviet Union, okay? Going into World War II, we are terribly afraid of anything communist. We don't trust anything communist. The Soviets don't trust anything Western. They see the Americans. They've come in, they've fought them once before. So when you look at World War II, don't look at this as, hey, this was a strong alliance, that something happened. Instead, look at this as an uneasy partnership that both sides did not really like. So once the need was over, it quickly fell apart. Because in 1939, 1940, we don't like the Soviets, they don't like us. Britain, in 1940, is prepping to send troops to Finland during the Winter War to fight against the Soviets. They're literally willing to fight the Soviets and the Germans, but the Finns surrender before the first boat leaves. Okay? The alliance born of World War II, and that'll be our topic next time, is simply an uneasy, we don't like you, you don't like us, but that guy's worse, we gotta fight him first. And it's in the fires of that conflict that Russia, or rather I should say the Soviet Union, will be born now as a superpower. And there is your person-time technology. The right time, the right technology, the right people, and you have all the makings of a Cold War. But that'll be our topic for next time, so I do apologize. I prefer to keep these to 45 minutes to 50, but had to go over the, beginning of the semester stuff. So if you haven't already, take a look through the syllabus. If you have any questions, let me know. Take it easy, and I will see you next time. Stay safe, comrades. Bye.